partners and peace, to the glory and thanksgiving of God our Creator. We continue with the Black Anglicans of Canada Declaration. We as people of African descent are commissioned and called to be ambassadors of reconciliation. We are called to create opportunities and space for courage building, healing, fellowship, and empowerment. This special calling is both a reminder and a challenge to ourselves and to the whole church that we are no longer destined to just obey, suffer, and witness, but to disrupt, heal, and lead. Our vision is, we envision the Anglican Church of Canada as a faith community that values and respects the rich diversity of Black people who are empowered to enjoy equitable participation, representation, and a sense of belongingness, inclusion in the mission of Jesus Christ and in the full life of the Anglican Church. Our mission is to increase the participation, representation, empowerment, and belongingness of Black people in both lay and ordained leadership roles in the full life of the Anglican Church of Canada, and to develop partnerships with Black communities, other racialized groups, and oppressed peoples. These are our goals that you can take a quick look at. The first is belongingness. The second is empowerment. The third is participation, and the fourth is representation. Brief explanation. Black is a designation used for people with Black African descent, including those of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-American ancestry, and those of other African roots. General membership is open to Black people who worship, work, serve, study, or volunteer in the Anglican Church community in the past, present, or those who aspire to be part of the Anglican community or support the stated mission and vision of Black Anglicans of Canada. Allies membership is open to internal and external allies who support the stated vision and mission of Black Anglicans of Canada. Our leadership team, our co-chairs are the Reverend Jacqueline Daly and Mr. Lance Wilson. Finance and governance, the Reverend Vernal Savage, Ms. Yvonne Murray, Mr. Loris Lawrence. Responsible for communication and membership and engagement, Ms. Anita Gittins. Spiritual care and inclusion, Brother Reginald Cranshaw. And our patron is Bishop Peter Fenty. Tonight, we are happy to have as our speaker, Jacqui Getfield. Jacqui is a mother who is very engaged in her children's education at their school and active at the district school board level. Having worked for over 20 years in PR, broadcasting, and communications, Jacqui is now completing a PhD at OISE, University of Toronto, in the Department of Social Justice Education. Her doctoral research focuses on the Black mother as advocate within the public school system in Ontario. Currently, she volunteers as the chair of the Parent Commission of the Ontario Alliance of Black School Educators. Previously, Jacqui has volunteered as chair of the Family Engagement Council of the Children's Treatment Network in York Region and Simcoe County. She was a member of her children's local school council, as well as a member of Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Advisory Committee, which is a subcommittee of the York Region District School Board. Passionately, she co-labors with educators, parents, administrators, community activists, and academic researchers to transform the system of education for all students. but particularly to make significant changes towards the success of Black students. Considering all that is occurring in education in our province at the moment, I'm sure there will be spirited discussion tonight. Please welcome with me, Jacqui Getfield.
Good evening, everyone. I wish to thank the Black Anglicans of Canada for inviting me to contribute to this series of weekly discussions. This series has been nothing short of courageous in its effort to disrupt, heal, lead the Anglican Church in Canada towards change. When individual Christians commit to real change, then the church must change because we are the church. So let us move toward change through conversation, mutual understanding, more dialogue, and then action. At the end of this webinar, you must promise to commit to 5 goals or ways you will fight anti-Black racism in education. Since I was invited to offer my thoughts, possibly bits of my research, my cumulative experiences with anti-Black racism in education here in Ontario, you must allow me to first position myself in this struggle. I come to this work, and it is work, physically, intellectually, and spiritually, because I had to engage with the healthcare professionals and teachers on behalf of my 2 children. To understand the disregard I experienced from these professionals, excuse me, I decided to conduct doctoral research on how racism impacts Black mothers' engagement with the elementary public school system in Ontario. I come to this work as a daughter of a veteran educator. My mother, recently deceased, spent over 40 years in the classroom in Jamaica, where she not only taught, but nurtured and fought on behalf of students who themselves were marginalized. Her passion was to transform the lives of, and I quote, poor people picnic through education. For those who don't know, picnic is the Jamaican word for child. My mom herself came from poverty. And when I say poverty, I mean by worldly standards. These days, we no longer seem to speak about money and class. We are silent about the politics of the unequal distribution of wealth and the opportunities among racialized people versus the opportunities that educated and non-raced people have. But I put it to you, when we don't see each other, we may actually be tricking ourselves into believing that our consciences are clear. We may even distance ourselves from, and so treat with total disregard, the marginalized and underserved among us. If we see all the social ills, then it would be unchristian of us to do nothing, wouldn't it? Don't it? Color blindness is a major problem. Whiteness is a culture. It is not about skin color. Whiteness and white supremacy are about the normal hegemonic culture that which we take for granted. If you will, think about a fish in the water. Everything is so natural that some people don't even realize that there is a mainstream culture that is intrinsically tied to the white race, ethnicity, and the culture. And therefore, things are different among our cultures. Not better, just different. Much like, us having accents and speech patterns, different. None is better, they're just different. So each of us must always pay attention to race, ability, and social class, among other social categories. Growing up, not only was I expected to see difference, but I was expected to help those who were less fortunate and less privileged than I. So our personal history and the history of our ancestors ground us. We are social beings. And so how we were raised and socialized to think and to act must affect who we are and have become or will become. So personally and politically, who is Jacqui Getfield? Well, Some would say I am a middle class, but low income, formally educated Black woman. I am a mother. I'm an evangelical Anglican Christian. But most would say I am a fierce and fearless advocate on behalf of my twin angels. But you know what, to tell the truth, I position myself primarily with a one-word concept, and that is Jamaican-ness. So I act Jamaicanly. Why would I start there when I have lived longer in Canada than I have lived in Jamaica? Well, this ABR work, anti-Black racism work, is tied into my core beliefs, values, and attitudes. It is because my navel string is buried there. I cut my political teeth there. In the 1970s, my home city, the country's capital city, Kingston, was a crucible of political action. That was before I even got to be 10 years old. Kingston was hot, hot in every way, even internationally. Our then Prime Minister, Michael Manley, Canada's then Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, and some African leaders were up to all sorts of good trouble. I think it was John Lewis who spoke about, yes, we should get into good trouble. My formative years were spent on the little island that told us we could, that demanded that we did, and that still expects that we will. Many of you may know the saying, to whom much is given, much is expected. Think Christian stewardship. And to understand what I'm talking about, this positioning a little bit further, a little more, think about the newly installed Bishop of Dover, Rose Hudson Wilkins. Check out her media appearances, whether print or in video. She is intentional about her Jamaican-ness. At every opportunity, she contextualizes what we believe to be natural, national, cultural expectations. So I hope you're now connecting how positioning and social location impact what I believe generally and what I do as a researcher and why. I am doing this so you too will be able to do the same sort of introspection, because that is what we must do before we can confront anti-Black racism generally, but in particularly anti-Black racism in education. So anti-Black racism is a term that was coined by Professor Akua Benjamin. She teaches at Ryerson and she has always been a community activist. If you haven't yet met her work, please check her out. A number of educational institutions online seem to share this definition of anti-Black racism. They say it is the prejudice, attitudes, beliefs, stereotyping, and discrimination that is directed at people of African descent. And it is rooted in their unique history and experience of enslavement and its legacy. Anti-Black racism is deeply entrenched in Canadian institutions, policies, and practices, to the extent that anti-Black racism is either functionally normalized or rendered invisible to the larger white society. Anti-Black racism is invisible. It is manifested in the current social, economic, and political marginalization of African Canadians, which includes unequal opportunities, lower socioeconomic status, higher unemployment, significant poverty rates, and overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. I want everybody to understand that who we are now as individuals and as a society cannot be divorced from our collective history that features the brutal enslavement of Black people by Europeans. We must unpack that our white ancestors either kidnapped, stole, bought, and sold, then displaced African peoples. We must acknowledge that for some of us, our history includes domestic slavery that was local and therefore minuscule and relatively inconsequential to the global slave trade of the white ancestors. Continental slavery was not widely practiced in Africa. I imagine it was more like, I guess it's like English serfdom, or the kind of slavery that is said to exist today in some countries, a sort of master-servant relationship that's tied into ethnocultural practices. Yes, These seem to have been a part of the social fabric on the African continent long before the Europeans arrived. But having said that, let us not get distracted. For practical and academic purposes, to investigate anti-Black racism in education in Ontario, we must set boundaries around anti-Black racism by focusing on the 400-year history of enslavement and inherently dehumanizing treatment that the Europeans meted out to Black people. Our current system of education is the legacy of European slavery and colonization. This means that in exploring the impact of anti-Black racism, we must focus on what happened to all of us, not just Black people. And so it is that Gloria Ladson-Billings, one of the preeminent African-American authors and foundational thinkers in critical race theory, asks, what is racism doing in a nice field like education? Think about that for a sec. Anti-Black racism is deeply entrenched in education and schooling because of who is at the center of power in our legal and social institutions. So now we are beginning to think about the supremacy of whiteness. White people think and act in certain ways according to their understanding of our collective history, and their culture, meaning their way of life, as I mentioned before, is different. But it's how do they understand this culture? While not many sensible people will willingly and openly say that they are racist or that they commit racist acts, their actions reveal otherwise. The data substantiate the claim that racist acts are committed against Black students and Black educators in Ontario regularly. Increasingly today, we are hearing that Black educators are dealing with racism. But Black educators protest much more quietly because they are unionized and regulated professionals. And so their salaries and potential for advancement will be implicated. In other words, because of fear of losing their livelihoods and their careers, many opt to suffer in silence, it seems. But fear, dividing us to conquer, silencing, are some of the tools within institutional designs of white supremacy. They're used to contain and restrain much larger marginalized subpopulations. A cursory look at the news at OHRC, that's the Ontario Human Rights Commission cases, and at the CHRC website. And if you choose to explore social media, you will come across stories of racist actions against Black students, and you will see the official and sometimes officious sounding responses of local, provincial, and federal governments. So what does ABR look like generally? Well, on the top of the list is racial profiling, whether it's being carded by the police while walking or driving, whether it's being surveilled by store employees when shopping. Anti-Black racism is about targeting Black people being targets of hate speech and hate crimes. It's the overrepresentation of Black children and youth in care, child protective services, children's aid societies, and overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. Right? In this webinar, we don't have time to link education with children's aid and show how the engagement between these institutions becomes a conduit into the criminal justice system. When we talk about anti-Black racism, we talk about the data on school disciplining and school failure. Black students fail school for so many reasons, but some of the reasons, if we were to be honest, is because administrators and educators disregard and ignore Black students and do not respond to the needs of Black students. And here I'm talking about Black and white educators. When we talk about anti-Black racism in education, we talk about surveillance and suspicion. Black students are preyed upon They are, as I mentioned, constantly under surveillance. So when they slip, they slide. Some educators are merciless and unforgiving. They call the police, but they don't call the parents to act on behalf of the student when there is a problem. Some Black students are reported to the police for minor infractions. In minor infractions that white students would get a little rap on the wrist, or don't do that next time. You'll be in trouble next time, but this time we're letting you off. That doesn't happen with some Black kids. And the educators claim that it is because of zero tolerance. There is zero tolerance policy. Before you know it, the child's name is in the system. Once the child's name is in the system, then they are known to police, and that's the beginning of a downhill spiral. Check out the human rights reports. Listen to the news. What's going on right now in the human rights, the delivery of the most recent human rights report. It's nothing new. It's old content. But the question is, will this call fall on deaf ears? This call for change. What about that 6-year-old girl, I think it was a few months ago, who was handcuffed in Brampton? I keep asking myself, who does that? What does the PDSB want this child and her peers to know for sure about Black children? I ask myself, what could have transpired between an adult and a 6-year-old little girl that the adult lost control of the situation and instead was in such fear that they had to call the police? And what could have happened to the police officers that they thought it best to put silver bracelets, handcuffs on a child of 6? These are just some of the ways ABR is manifested in education. To me, it seems like sanity. But then again, because I'm paid to philosophize, I have to stop and think, and I say, but is it really? Is it really insanity? Or is it intentional? Is this a deliberate strategy, a design to push out Black students and keep the numbers of those who graduate so low? Is this a deliberate ploy to destabilize Black minds so that they won't advance as quickly and in as great numbers as non-raced students? I put it to you. Sometimes it doesn't matter how hard a little Black child works if they're in the Ontario inner city areas. If they come upon forces that influence their abilities to succeed, it really renders them, they just can't succeed. They cannot succeed because the problems are systemic. I say to you, seemingly it doesn't matter either how much middle class, educated, professional Black parents advocate. Again, their advocacy efforts seem to be thwarted and render them impotent. And I say this, you know what, let me testify. It doesn't matter if a Black mother has spent the last 6 years studying family engagement, social identities, and the systems of education that exist in Canada. It doesn't amount to anything much when she faces a racist educator or a racist team of educators. This is because policies and practices and the solidarity among professionals create barriers that are insurmountable. And you know what it comes down to? Whether or not she has the social capital to figure out who on the inside can help her to chip away at the master's house. Together, we strategize on how to use the master's tools. And yes, it also matters if the parents have the financial resources to hire teachers and tutors. But these solutions for the individual child or the individual family doesn't help the failing majority. The system remains unchanged. Some say we should seek recourse in the courts, but that too is problematic. Sometimes parents don't have unlimited resources to fight a racist system of education, up to the point of and including going to courts or the Human Rights Commission. But that is how the system is built. There is an expectation in the Ontarian society that there is recourse in the courts. But how are parents expected to engage within a system when they themselves don't have the resources or the know-how? Listen, this is far removed from how my mother interpreted education and schooling. So it is far removed from how I was brought up to view education and schooling. So I am telling you, it is a stretch for most parents to understand the system of education and how to deal with anti-Black racism. So if we are to fight anti-Black racism collectively, I put it to you that we do ourselves an injustice when we spoon feed adults. We must emancipate our minds from mental slavery, because none but ourselves can free our minds. Of course, I'm borrowing from Haile Selassie, and of course, those words were made immortal by the great international iconic musician Bob Marley. Formal education and schooling comes second to the freeing of our minds. To emancipate our minds, we cannot be fearful. We cannot live in fear. We must be bold. So here is your call to action. The call of Black to disrupt, heal, and lead can be unpacked in different ways. But certainly, the process is not linear. There is no prescribed set of orderly steps to confront anti-Black racism in our social institutions. We need a multiplicity of approaches. To be honest, Black educators and Black parents have long since figured out that the education system was not designed with Black students in mind. But the challenge has always been, how do we disrupt and dismantle the entire system and rebuild it collectively as a society based on philosophical foundations that embrace the thinking and doing of all peoples? If we say we envision an anti-racist society, all of us should want to see an educational system that regards all cultures, not just the hegemonic white culture. Yeah, there is much work to be done. There is much work to be done if we want to see change. The data must begin to reflect betterment for Black students, meaning reduced disciplinary action, increased number of those who graduate, less elementary school children being arrested or detained by the law, teachers not cursing out students and calling them the N-word, or engaging in more subtle yet persistent microaggressions. So the big question is, my friends, what are you going to do about it? As Christian stewards, how can we use our time, talent, and treasure towards the betterment of our Black sisters and brothers, and in particular, Black students? Let's disrupt. Let's disrupt. The status quo isn't working. So we have to dismantle. So how are we gonna do this? What are we gonna use to chip away at the master's house? Right now is the time for you to write down your 5 goals after answering these questions. Who are you? What skills do you have? How much time do you have? Of all the problems that you have read about or heard about, which ones do you want to tackle? Disrupting calls us to trouble the system. If you understand the nuts and bolts of education in Ontario, how can you help the groups that already exist? How can you help groups such as Parents of Black Children in York Region and Black Lives Matter in Toronto? But there are so many other groups. If you are not inclined to, meetings and groups, are you inclined to research? If so, call me up, let's chat. Let's talk about on-the-ground type of scholarly work. If you're a doer, if you're not a doer, but you have income, then how are you gonna put your money to work? How are you gonna stay involved and ensure that your investment is reaping the expected and agreed upon outcomes? And if you're a healer, how can you respond to the trauma in the Black community? There are many ways to help Black students. They need volunteers. Black organizations need volunteers. They need people to help them to address the school issues, such as bullying. They need the creation of safe spaces for recreation and opportunities for recreation. So if you are a leader or you have the mindset of a leader, what can you do? Well, first, you can wake up your family members and your friends. But before you do that, you yourself have to be woke. You must lead from in front. You must walk hand in hand with your triune God, because burnout is a definite possibility. Anger will consume you. And yes, you'll be frustrated by the rigid, unyielding system of education. But if you experience all of that, I say welcome. Welcome to the journey that Black mothers have been on for centuries. Come walk with us, talk with us, come cry with us, come laugh with us. Let me tell you, the journey is near impossible in some parts. Some parts have as craters and potholes. When you fall in it, you can't come out for days, for weeks, for months. But guess what? We must travel this journey. And I prefer for us to do it together. So along this journey, you know, back in spring of 2020, a white officer knelt for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on a Black man's neck while his the officer's racialized colleague just stood and watched. Of course, you know, this happened in the United States of America. But the world awoke. The world shuddered when George Floyd said, "I can't breathe." The world heard him when he called out for his then deceased mother. "Mama, mama." He wanted help. He wanted her loving care. He wanted her to come and get him. But you know what? I believe he also knew it was his time. I believe it is now your time to disrupt, to heal, and to lead. The knee of the educational system has been on our children's necks for far too long. Black students in Ontario need us to come and get them. My friends, it is time. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. We appreciate your delivery. And now it's time for questions for you. We thank you for reminding us of what anti-Black racism is. And thank you for taking us down the historical road of social and economic disparities. Thank you for mentioning our current system of education and the fact that it's a result of our history. And thank you also for the call to action. What are you going to do about anti-Black racism in education? And also the 5 goals. So now, this is your time for questions. I think we have a first question that says, should we advocate for Black faculty?
I believe it's important. I believe that the faculty, the teachers must reflect, and I prefer to say proportionately, our citizenry. We must have Black teachers who look like a part of the student population. We must have enough. We don't have enough. And we certainly don't have enough administrators. And as for the upper echelon of the district school boards, I mean, we just heard that we had about 3 or 4 Black female directors of education. We should be having that in September. That's a first. So yes, we need to have better representation in terms of educators in Ontario, Black educators in Ontario.
There's a second question here. What are some concrete ways that parents of white children can help to advocate for their Black classmates?
what are the concrete ways that, I'm sorry, parents of white children can help to advocate for their Black classmates?
Yes,
That's a very interesting question.
it is indeed.
Parents of Black children as allies. I do believe that as allies, it's important for white parents to form alliances with Black parents. I think that's the first place that they should start. I think this getting to know the Black experience is important. I am not saying that they shouldn't advocate, but Black parents have a voice. Black parents should have a voice. Black parents should be encouraged to let that voice be heard. And so I am not sure if they should advocate on behalf of their Black classmates, but I'm more concerned about them, like I said, being prepared and understand what this system of education means, so that we don't always have white parents doing the advocacy.
Thank you. Another question. In the elementary curriculum, is there any focus on racialized groups and their history in Canada and beyond? That is apart from the First Peoples of this country.
Well, the elementary curriculum has been a point of discussion for decades. And it is because, again, of who designed the curriculum. So while there is the courtesy mention of, select Black celebrities or certain African-American civil rights leaders in the month of February, there is not a wholesale appreciation of Black history or Black content of across the subject disciplines. And that has always been a problem. It continues to be a problem. Yes, there is some progress being made. As I mentioned, if we have more Black educators, then they'll be more inclined, if they're brave enough, to adjust curriculum content, because teachers do have some kind of, I would say, they have the liberty. They can take the liberty in putting certain things. They have certain academic freedom in interjecting and injecting Black content in the curriculum. Do they choose to do it? Do they know how to do it? Are some educators wanting to do it but not sure about how to do it? All of that, could be investigated at another time. But yeah, there needs to be more in the more in the curriculum, much more. When Black students don't see themselves in the curriculum, they are not as engaged. When you when your interests are being reflected in what you learn, then of course they're going to be more engaged. So yeah, I hope I've answered the question.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Jacqui, what has surprised you in what you've discovered in your research and in your graduate learning?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? What has
surprised you in what you've discovered in your research and in your graduate learning?
What has surprised me? It's not so much what has surprised me as what I'm a little bit concerned about, and I mentioned it in my presentation, is the fact that some teachers and racialized teachers are as much a part of the problem in the ways that they treat or don't treat, ignore or disregard Black students. What has surprised me is the interracial issues between racialized people and the treatment, as I mentioned, that Black students are the treatment that is meted out to Black students. That surprised me when mothers complain, and they went into it not thinking that this would have been an issue. But in certain, I would say, communities in Ontario, where there is a great number of one racialized population over another, where it is greater, the numbers are greater, that is increasingly a problem here in York Region and in the Peel District School Board. That surprised me. And I was, disappointed, but I have to be a realist. The school is a microcosm of the larger society. Did that answer your question? I'm so sorry. I may have gotten lost in my answer.
I didn't ask the question. I'm only reading them as they're here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question. In Nova Scotia, and thank you for Thomas from Nova Scotia for checking in with us again. There are Black educator groups. Is there any affiliation or coordination across the country between Black educator organizations and groups?
I belong to the Ontario National Alliance of Black School Educators, but of course that's for Ontario. I am not sure, to be honest with you, that there is one organization that's an umbrella organization that links all Black educator groups. But I know within ONABC, we have representation across the GTA, I would say, and we're going further into Ottawa and I think Windsor, but again, that's just Ontario. So I am not sure. I wouldn't be able to speak definitively on that. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Are you able to point to specific activities that the church can be involved in to help address some of the anti-Black racism problems within our school systems?
The church itself, I would say that the church itself needs to do some introspection to see what does anti-Black racism look like within the church. That is not to say that the church cannot help Black students, but I think that is important. As a first step, it's always important that introspection is done. So whether it's the individual or a corporate entity or a body like the church, I would say the first thing to do is to do some introspection, because you cannot help someone in areas that you may also have some blind spots. The church can help schools in as far as there may be affiliated groups, because there's a huge division, or there's supposed to be a division between church and state. So in as far as there are groups that exist within the school, then yes, you can help the school. But I'm not sure how many principals, I'm not a principal, so I can't speak to definitively, but I'm not sure how many principals would bravely encourage church faith leaders to come into the school, because that could be interpreted, in a negative way by some parents. As it is, I know of Black educators who, when they have to teach religion or they have to teach social studies, they walk a fine line between, selling the idea of Christianity or Christian religions over the other religions that they may not know as much about, and they have gotten in trouble for it. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if principals would be wary of, for example, my priest, Stephen Fields, coming into a church, a school, a public school, with his collar and all, you know, wanting to talk to students. I don't know. I see there could be some problems. There could be some, whether real or perceived, there could be some problems. And again, the school community is so diverse in terms of religion that might be interpreted as, you know, somebody wanting to sell kids on the idea of either Christianity or any other form of religion that is represented by the faith leader. So I don't know. I don't know how it would work.
Okay. Thank you. We have a comment here from someone. As the parent of 2 Black sons, my biggest obstacle has been teachers' misinformation and ignorance re the Black experience. Case in point, my son was expelled for using the term Black power. The teacher claimed, the teacher claimed he was advocating for Black supremacy, and the term, the questions are coming in so quickly I'm not keeping up. The teacher claimed he was advocating for Black supremacy, and the term meant the same as white power. My 13-year-old knew the origin and meaning of the term. Staff did not. How do you counter this utter lack of understanding? I am a white mother with 2 Black adopted children. I organized the Black history events in my son's school for years. So the question is, how do you counter this utter lack of understanding on behalf of educators about mere terminology or specific terminology?
How do you counter it? This is a matter of education. This is a matter of teachers or educators needing to admit when they don't know something. But that is if they're willing to even appear as though they're interested in learning about the Black experience. When you come upon a teacher, as I mentioned in my delivery, who is racist, there is nothing much that one can do, because you cannot, the parent doesn't have the power. The student, a Black student, definitely doesn't have the power. Educating teachers generally about anything that they don't know, including sometimes, you know, subject-verb agreement in sentences, is fraught with problems because, again, it's a power struggle. Teachers believe that they should know, and they do know. And if you conceptualize your power and authority in one way, and they're not willing to give space to parents or students to come into the classroom and to learn from them, then there's very little that you as a parent can do. And when, as I mentioned, when the team of persons get together, professionals get together, it is difficult, very, very difficult to come up against the system and win. Very difficult. So I'm so sorry that your son was expelled. I am sorry, but this is an indication of what parents must deal with, what students deal with in terms of disciplinary action against Black students. You know, imagine saying something and sticking up, which is what you want kids to do. You want kids at a certain age to begin to think critically and think for themselves. So I am not sure, I'm not sure that there's anything that you could have done to help that particular teacher. No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you. Our time is running out. We do have time for one quick response from you, Jacqui. Can you, in one sentence, talk about changes happening in Peel? Now, I know that you're connected with York, but Peel has certainly been in the news often enough for all of us to know something about it.
Well,
In one sentence, please.
in one sentence, there is power in community. There is power when political politicians, such as the district school, the school trustees, engage with parents and engage with community. And we say community, not just in Peel, but they have reached out to a lot of organizations across Ontario. There is power in numbers. That's just how the system is set up here in terms of democracy. And so I believe that Peel is destined to have some kind of change. I believe that those parents who or groups that were at one point being threatened by lawsuits by the district school board and members of the district school board, I believe that it's important to get into good trouble, and they got into good trouble, and they are still in the fight. A lot is being done in Peel, and I can only be hopeful that it will improve. Things will improve for Black students there in Peel. Sorry, that was more than a sentence, but.
Jacqui, thank you very much for your presentation and the answers to the several questions tonight. I apologize for those of you who have asked questions that we're not entertaining at this moment. We run out of time. We want to thank you all for being with us here tonight. I see that there are folks from across Ontario, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Montreal, BC, and also in Michigan. Thank you very much for being with us. And Nicole has just popped up that she doesn't want me to forget Caledon, Ontario. Now I'd like to pass over to, I believe, Reverend Jacqui or Reverend Bruno.
I'm gonna go to share screen. Well, thanks again, Jacqui, for your very powerful and insightful presentation. We continue our journey of healing, disrupting, and leading next week. The next slide, please. Who's messing with my slide? We have Dr. Nimoy Lewis, I believe he's online, who will be talking to us about anti-Black racism in housing, secrets revealed. And I know that Nimoy is homegrown, a Torontonian, and will have much to say to us about housing and anti-Black racism in that sector. Then the following week, August the 26th, please come on back. We have one of our very own, the Reverend Allison Harry Singh, who will be talking about overcoming the myth of the model minority, anti-Black racism in the South Asian community. So please, please, please come on back. We have lots more of exciting conversation and roundtable for you to be engaged with. And again, as my fellow co-chair remind you, please continue to support us. Next slide, please. Our August, whatever donation we had in August, all of it is going to be going to support Black Lives Matter, who was with us last week. This is part of our little effort to strengthen, to advance good work and good disruption that's being led by Black Lives Matter Toronto. So we thank those who have supported us and look forward to others coming on board. So once again, we're so grateful that you have taken time from your busy lives to be with us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place. Come in your pajamas.